This bearing here, for years and years, I think they're pretty hard to get, but because when you go to buy a bearing, the numbers for the bearing were actually stamped on the outside, and the problem with that is this little bearing is a thrust bearing, and it rides right up against the face of that. So if there's writing on it, it's going to tear up the thrust bearing. There's another big washer sits on top of this. So what I did find was a replacement for that, and it's this one here, the SKF. It's a 6206 NRJEM. And here's the original bearing that I took out. So the importance is when you do a bottom end rebuild, you always want to replace this bearing. Even though this one seems pretty nice. If you can see here, there's no writing on this side, but this side actually has numbers stamped into the bearing. So use this one for the replacement. And these are made all different places. This one's made in the USA. I got some that are made in France and some other countries. I just look at them before I buy them and make sure they're not from somewhere that might make inferior bearings. So what I've done so far is put the crank in, put a new cam chain in. It's a DID gold. Cleaned up the top case, the bottom case, all the bottom end cases are all cleaned up now. Put the crank in this morning. So when people put the transmission back in, they don't realize that that little nubbin has to go in the bearing. So that just sits in there like that. The other thing we need to know is when you replace the bearing, when you replace the transmission bearing over here, you got to either reuse your old snap ring or have purchased ahead of time, and I don't know where you get them. I just happen to have a bag full of them. The snap ring here that goes on the bearing, the ones that come with the bearings are actually too big, so it makes you can't put the bearing in the engine case. So you have to replace this one with this one. It's actually smaller diameter. And then the other thing you want to check out when you're got your transmission apart is the reverse gears. So check for chipped teeth, and forget which one I'm using now. Definitely not using this one here. This one's the one that came out of his engine. It's got some pretty chipped up teeth on it. Still work, but as long as I'm here, why not put something in that's better? So this is good news for Mr. Bean. That's his name. I found a better. It looks pretty new. It's barely got any wear on that point right there. And it's still got resiliency. These are impossible to get. So it's still got, still kind of rubbery. The one I put in it is rock hard, but it's full size. Still got the teeth on it and everything, but I want to put this one in because I feel better about this one. So I'm getting ready to put the bottom pan on, bottom of the engine. I put that other roller in, and I think I'm ready. And don't forget to put your reverse gear on before you put the bottom pan on, because otherwise you got to take off the shift fork here with a bolt on the top. Take the you'd have to take that off to get this in. It won't go in with the bottom pan on. Yep. So I think I'm ready. You just make sure all the cases are clean. There's no schmutz. And on the other side, I'm going to put the sealant and then put the two pieces together, and it'll be the bottom end will be together. Here's a little tidbit of information on the engines. On the non-synchro engine, this piece here, it goes straight across and matches that. It does have the gap in it still. But if you want to use you're going to convert your non-synchro engine to a synchro, you got to get in there and cut this piece off. You can fatigue it and then break a piece off, but this piece has got to be gone or it's going to run into your gears. Let's see, there was one other thing. Sometimes this is very close to the transmission. If you have a non-synchro, you might have to notch it out slightly. You won't know until you put the bottom case on and start turning the transmission to see if there's anything going to hit. So it's pretty clean. So I'm going to put my sealant on it and then put it on. Right, everybody has their own sealant, their own favorite sealant. I've used all kinds of stuff too. The shop I used to work for that worked on Honda 600s, Foreign Affair in Santa Clara. Vince used to use Indian Head, which is Permatex shellac product. I never liked it. My dad used to use it. But anyway, you just need a thin layer. And what I like is Permatex Ultra Black. It's very smooth. I like that. And this one I use, this is the same as 3-Bond and Honda Bond. So 3-Bond, it's gray, it's elastic. I use it on the base gasket, the head gasket, and the cam box gasket. I guarantee it'll take at least a year before your gaskets start leaking. They're just made to leak. So, thin layer, very thin layer. Don't need much. The machine cases are machine fit, but they're not matched. So you can use a different top case and a different bottom case. You got different engines. You got a hole in the bottom of your engine where it threw a rod. You can put a different bottom case on. It's not going to make any difference. All right, here's where your last bolt goes, and don't forget to put it in. And when you're taking the engine apart, don't forget to take it out. Got the aluminum washer on it. Just screws right in there. So it's looking pretty good. I'm going to take the primary drive apart. I got brand new rubbers for in here, and brand new rubbers for in here. We'll put that bearing in, put the oil pump on. I'll show you how to put the oil pump on. It only goes on one way. If you put it on the other way, it'll crack and then shatter, and you won't have an oil pump anymore. The book actually shows it being put in backwards, so it's good to have a parts book also. If you get the chance, go to Honda600coupe.com. Steve there has got manuals you can download for free. I've had my manuals since the 70s, so but you can download them, print them out, put them on paper. Then if you ever need to know any dimensions, like the bolts, it's got all the dimensions, which bolts they are and how long they are, diameter and length. And the only one that's incorrect is the one on the clutch. And if you put the ones that they recommend in, they're too long and they'll tear up the engine case. But I'll show you that too when we get there. Okay, as promised, this is the way the oil pump rod goes in. So this is the back of the primary drive. It's on here. But you got to put the oil pump on first. And when you're looking at the book, it shows the oil pump rod being in backwards, like this. And by this, I mean you can't see the two notches on the oil pump rod. oil pump rod's offset. So if you put it in backwards after a while, because of the binding, it'll just crack. Also, Honda says to put that dot facing out. So that's another thing to look out for. I don't know if it makes a difference, but there it is. When you're assembling the primary drive, these sprockets are offset. You can see up here, offset. So you gotta look for this mark, this dot right here. And then on the other sprocket, you'll find the same dot. That notch goes up, and the other opposite one goes down. It goes around the fittings. There's the dot. It goes 180 degrees from this dot. Do not line up the dots, otherwise you won't have offset sprockets. Like that. Other thing, let's see, what was the other thing? Oh yeah, the other thing, this has marks on it, so when you put that back together, they're supposed to line up. But the funny thing is, on the replacement ones that they were selling in the 90s, they didn't have those marks anymore. This the side of the engine is a different thrust bearing, because the one I took out of it missing some needle bearings. Now there's oil grooves on one side. Don't ask me which way, but I'm going to put it oil grooves to the bearing. Don't ask me why, it doesn't say in the manual. And then this is the thrust plate. It's hardened steel and it runs up against that. So what I did was I cleaned it, and then I actually put it on my buffer over here, and I buffed it so it's smooth. And you also want to check it, see if it's got any grooves in it, and this one actually looks very good and perfect. So that just goes on there like that. And when you put the primary hub on it, it lines everything up, and that's kind of a fun thing too, to put those on, because they got to be exactly right on, or they just kind of just pop into place. All right, here's the primary assembled. The primary drive assembled. What you want to do when you put it back together is make sure that both these chains, when you have the tensioner in, are the same on the top. If you got one that's drooping like this, you're only driving on one side. This is the drive direction, so if it's not turning on both chains, you're really only pulling on one chain. This is a worn out roller. It'll still work because there's plenty of spring tension here. So here it is with the worn out tensioner installed. See, that's the crispy one, and it still has tension. So if you can't get a hold of a nice one, like this one, go ahead and reuse your other one. But now they're, what, 70 years old? 1970, let's see. Guess I'm not quite that old, so let's see. They're old by now. My math just, it's horrible. So anyway, I'm going to put the good one back in. Here they are side by side. See the different, definitely a different diameter. So this is the original style seal that goes on the primary cover. It's got a wiper on the top. Additional part, but it's only on the top of the seal. It's a seal wiper, or it might be an oil diverter, I'm not sure. It goes to the top, faces up. If you've got a plain seal, then it's not going to matter. Alright, so I got the bolts tightened up, but what you want to do when you tighten them up though is go across. Alright, then put your clutch disc on that you're going to use. And this is one I had relined, because you don't want it on the disc. Alright, then we're going to put the disc on. In several locations. The thing that goes on before this is actually this, and that is cleaned. I ran the conditioning disc over it on my angled die grinder, so that cleaned that, and then I cleaned up the ears just a little bit as well, not much, just enough. So you want to lay that down like that and get 3 bolts. The ones you took out are ones that you know go through it. Three split lock washers. So I got these cleaned up, and there's a hollow spot here. So one goes here. One goes here. These aren't new bolts, they're just replated, but new lock washers. And one goes here. And you leave them all loose. You can tighten them through the hole in the aluminum part. Alright, so the next part that goes on is the aluminum part, and it's only going to go on one way. You can try turning it around different directions, but it looks like it would line up there. These holes don't line up, so it only goes on one way. You'll find out when you start putting it together. Alright, so that goes on first. Now you can tighten these bolts up. $10mm socket. I use my Super Lube, my favorite grease. This small film, I put it on the tops of these, just to help out a little bit. I usually put some on the spring, on this piece as well. So the bolts are all tightened up, and all the washers are all on, and then there's these 6 spacers, and sometimes you get a little wear marks in them, so I just turn the wear marks so they're facing the other direction. So instead of to the outside where the wear marks were created, to the inside where they're not going to wear. Always looks good. Okay, then fulcrum spring goes on, and then look for the wear marks, and I like to put the wear so it's not pushing on, so it's in between. Now I'm pushing on a new spot, and then another fulcrum spring. These have a slight amount of grease on them. Then there's a plate. This plate goes on top. Usually have to push those around to get them to seat down. And then you might have to put the nuts on first and then take them off again as it cinches down. You might do every other one, and the ones that are the problem ones are the ones that are on the springs. On these ones here, they don't want to lift up. So if you get every other one started, and you might hear a giant pop all of a sudden. Don't be too worried about it. It's kind of normal. Just go around, tighten them all, make sure there's about the same amount of threads sticking out when you're done. I found carburetor screws that have the captured washer. I'm going to use those. Right where this screw is, I'll put a little bit of grease right on top of that, because that's where that piece is going to be rubbing. So these have been zinc. I got these already zinc plated. Makes everything pretty. Sometimes you gotta be careful they won't go down exactly straight. You gotta put them in at an angle. Then when you tighten the screw down, then it pulls it down. It's number 2 Phillips. About 4 in, you're done. Alright, here's a rebuilt, well, it's not really rebuilt, but it's reconditioned pressure plate. So you just put it on, you set up the dots so that they're lined up. And see, I told you I was going to tell you how long these bolts are. So they're about 32 millimeters. That's probably what it says in the parts catalog. So there's 8 bolts here. You want to tighten these down so they're even pressure, and then start working around in the circle again. Instead of just cranking one down all by itself. This one here, you could probably just crank all the way down with the DeWalt. That one's tight, that one's tight, that one's tight, that one's tight. So that's the clutch. And before you put the cover on, you'll put some grease around here to reduce the wear